Has Africa gotten independence? Is it really, really independent? Are we really, really free as Africans? It is a question that has been flying through my mind over and over during the course of the years, asking myself. Let me give an example. If you go to so many African cities, most of the buildings, most of the infrastructure that exists dates back to prior independence, dates back to the colonial era, which means it was built by the colonizers, by the white Europeans who were in our countries as our colonizers at the moment. Nothing much. If you were to look, there are few cities in Africa, obviously, which are an exception, which you would find they're like new emerging certain parts of town, new buildings are being built. But also, if you go deep and below, who is building those buildings? It is still not Africans. It is still the Chinese building those buildings for themselves, or the multinational companies, the big corporate companies from America, from Europe, building these buildings for themselves as investments for themselves. Uh, so you ought to ask yourself, if we have not managed to develop much after what we have inherited from the colonizers, what are we? How can we say we are free? How can we show what is it that we have to show for that independence and say we are free, we have the political independence, now this is our country, we are running it? What have you done for so many years? Some of our democracies are 60 years. Some of these other countries have had independence for 40 years, 50 years. But there's nothing to show for it. What the old infrastructure that the colonizers left, some of it is already decaying and dilapidating. Nobody's maintaining it. We as black people in other countries that the white farmers were chased out of the land, and the land was inherited by the indigenous people. These white people, the farmers, they left most of the infrastructure there. But if you go today, 20 years later, 30 years later, 40 years later, there's nothing to show for it. There is literally nothing to show for it. Everything has been broken, everything has been destroyed. What does it say about us as black people, as Africans? Not to say the colonizers were perfect and were running these governments perfectly. Yes, they were oppressing black people, but at least we must appreciate the fact that they were doing something. They were building in a very short period of time. They were developing cities. They were building this. They were building that. All the industries were functioning and were running, even if it was for their own benefit, but it was functioning at the time. It was not benefiting black people, but they were doing something that is tangible. Rather than us, when we took over as black people, we destroyed everything, pretty much. In exceptions, we do have exceptions. We do have some few countries doing well, which have leadership that is patriotic to their country, and not to forget. I'm not to be ignorant of what happened in some of these countries with sanctions, with sabotage, and to make sure those black governments will look bad, but still the question remains to us, the challenge to us. Since we have obtained independence, what have we done? What do we have to show for it and say we are a free people? This is what we have built. We are building our country. This is what we can show for it. And this raises the question, really, if we have nothing to show for it. And it also raises the question that if we say we have gained political independence, you ought to ask yourself, do you actually feel free in Africa as a young person today? I bet the answer from many African young people today will be no. We don't feel free. What has actually happened is Africa has replaced the white oppressors with black oppressors. If journalists are being imprisoned just for doing their job without breaking any law, if our young people The youth of this continent are being killed, are being brutally murdered because they have a different view than those who are in leadership, because they are exposing corruption, or they are challenging mismanagement, or they are exposing corruption, or they want to offer an alternative uh, in terms of leadership. If we are being tortured like that, we are not free as a generation. We cannot proclaim ourselves free. If we are not economically free, we do not have jobs, we do not have job opportunities, we do not have any opportunities to grow, the economies are in tatters, we cannot talk about freedom. We always want to show appreciation all the time to our leaders and our forefathers for liberating us as a people. But on the other hand, you have played your own part. You have fought your own battles. Our battle as a young generation, as a new generation, is different than yours. Our battle is to further democracy in Africa, because this is the system that we have signed up to. If we have signed up to democracy, then we have to stand true to those values of democracy, and be democratic and respect the process and respect those constitutions. Our own fight is to liberate ourselves economically. Our own battles as the young generation is to make sure Africa prospers. Our fight as the young generation is to make sure we put Africa on a global stage. It is to make sure Africa also becomes a dominant force in the world. Our battle as the young generation is to modernize Africa. Our fight as a young generation is to do away with poverty. In my understanding, because we have signed up for democracy, the ballot system was supposed to be the system that was supposed to select who become leaders. But because you have chosen to undermine those processes and play dirty tricks and dirty politics and manipulated the ballot to keep yourself in power against the will of the people, because you have chosen not to respect constitutionalism. Hence, you have left the young generation with no choice but to rise up and form a revolution so that we can demand of the changes that we wish to see happening in Africa, so that we can build a new future, the future that we are going to be in, that you are not part of. For the next generation, we have to do something. We have to demand of the change that we wish to see in Africa. If you do not want to give it to us, if you do not want to give chance to young people to be in positions of leadership, you leave the young people with no choice.